Charlotte Harrison took one look at me in my work clothes, saw my brown skin and dark hair, and her smile froze like ice forming on a winter pond. William's handshake was brief, his pale blue eyes already dismissing me before Sarah even finished the introduction. They were looking for an apartment, Sarah explained. Something affordable but nice for her parents who were downsizing after William's recent retirement from his insurance company job. What they didn't know, what Sarah herself didn't know, was that I owned this entire building, along with 11 others scattered throughout the Twin Cities. My name is Miguel Rodriguez, and I came to this country from Honduras when I was 7 years old. My parents cleaned offices at night and worked in restaurant kitchens during the day, saving every penny so their children could have better opportunities. I studied accounting, worked 3 jobs through college, and invested every dollar I could spare into real estate. By the time I met Sarah at a charity fundraiser 2 years earlier, I was financially secure beyond my wildest childhood dreams. But I had learned early that money changes how people see you. Some become your friend only for what you can give them. Others resent your success, especially when it comes wrapped in brown skin with an accent that emerges when I'm tired or emotional. So I kept my wealth private, even from Sarah initially, wanting to be loved for who I was, not what I owned. I offered the Harrisons a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor for just $100 a month, telling them it was a special deal through my property management connections. Sarah squeezed my hand, grateful that I was helping her parents during a difficult financial transition. Charlotte's mouth twisted as if she'd bitten into something sour when she realized they'd be accepting help from me, but William's practical nature won out. They signed the lease that afternoon. The first few months passed peacefully enough. Sarah and I continued planning our wedding, a small ceremony scheduled for the following spring. Her parents maintained a cool distance, but I told myself they just needed time to warm up to me. I grew up believing that respect and patience could overcome any prejudice. That if I just proved myself worthy enough, good enough, successful enough, even the coldest hearts would eventually thaw. I was wrong. The subtle digs started at Sunday dinners. Charlotte would serve everyone else before placing my plate down last, often forgetting to give me utensils until I asked. She'd make comments about authentic American food whenever I mentioned my mother's cooking, as if the recipes passed down through generations in my family were somehow less valid than her casseroles from Betty Crocker cookbooks. William had his own methods. He'd interrupt me mid-sentence to correct my pronunciation, even when I hadn't mispronounced anything. He'd launch into long stories about his grandfather who fought in World War II, emphasizing how his family had been here for generations, their roots deep in American soil. The implication was clear as daylight. I was a weed in their garden, something foreign that didn't belong, Sarah noticed. Of course she did. My brilliant, compassionate fiancé would touch my knee under the table when her father got particularly pointed with his comments. She'd change the subject when her mother asked yet again if my documentation was in order, a question that made my stomach burn with anger I couldn't express. But she also believed they'd come around once we were married, once they saw how happy I made their daughter. The week before our wedding, I made a decision that would haunt me for years to come. I decided to tell Sarah about my properties. Wanting to start our marriage with complete honesty, we were sitting in our favorite coffee shop, the one where we'd had our first date, when I pulled out a folder containing deeds and financial statements. Sarah's eyes widened as she flipped through the papers, seeing property after property listed under my name or my various LLCs. Her coffee grew cold as she processed the numbers, the rental income, the equity I'd built over 15 years of careful investment and brutal self-denial. When she finally looked up at me, tears were streaming down her face. I thought she was upset that I'd hidden this from her, and I immediately launched into apologies and explanations. But she stopped me with a gentle hand on my lips. These weren't tears of anger or betrayal. They were tears of understanding, of recognizing the weight I'd been carrying alone, the fear of being used or judged that had kept me silent. We agreed that night to keep my financial situation private from her parents. Sarah understood instinctively what I had learned through hard experience, that money wouldn't make them accept me. It might even make things worse. We would tell them eventually, she promised, once they'd gotten to know the real me, once they'd learned to see past their prejudices. Our wedding day dawned bright and clear, one of those perfect Minnesota spring days where the whole world seems washed clean and new. Charlotte wore a black dress to the ceremony, claiming she'd had no time to shop for anything else. William gave a toast that managed to avoid mentioning my name even once, referring to me only as Sarah's choice and her husband, as if I were a decision she'd made rather than a person she'd married. But none of that mattered when I looked into Sarah's eyes as we exchanged vows. She was my home, my safe harbor in a world that often felt hostile and unpredictable. With her beside me, I could handle anything her parents threw my way. Or so I believed. The harassment began to escalate after the wedding. Charlotte started letting herself into our apartment with the spare key Sarah had given her for emergencies. I'd come home from work to find my papers moved, my desk reorganized, items missing that would later turn up in strange places. When I mentioned installing a security system, she accused me of trying to isolate Sarah from her family. William took to dropping by unannounced during the day when he knew I'd be at work, filling Sarah's ears with stories about men who'd seemed perfect until their true nature emerged. He'd clip articles about domestic violence, about financial abuse, about immigration fraud, leaving them on our kitchen counter with certain passages highlighted in yellow. The night everything changed started like any other Sunday dinner at our place. I'd made my mother's famous pollo guisado, the smell of cilantro and garlic filling our apartment with memories of my childhood. Charlotte walked in, took one sniff, and announced that something smelled rotten. She insisted on opening every window, claiming the ethnic spices were making her nauseous. I was standing at the stove, stirring the rice, when William cornered me. His breath reeked of the whiskey he'd been sipping all afternoon, and his face was flushed with liquid courage and righteous anger. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave bruises, and hissed that he knew what I was. He knew I was illegal, knew I was using his daughter, knew I was probably running drugs or worse to afford the lifestyle I was pretending to have. Sarah walked in just as I was prying his fingers off my arm. She saw her father stumbling back, saw my face tight with controlled anger, and immediately stepped between us. But instead of defending me, instead of acknowledging what had just happened, she asked what I had done to upset him. That assumption, that I must be the problem, cut deeper than any of her parents' direct attacks. That night, after her parents had gone home and Sarah lay sleeping beside me, I made a decision. I would give them one more chance, one more opportunity to see me as a human being worthy of basic respect. I would invite them to the building I owned, show them my office, introduce them to my property manager and maintenance staff. I would prove to them that I was a legitimate businessman, not whatever stereotype they'd constructed in their minds. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday afternoon. I asked Sarah not to tell them the true purpose, just that I wanted to show them where I worked. They arrived 15 minutes late, Charlotte complaining about the parking, William making snide comments about the neighborhood. I led them up to my office on the top floor, my heart pounding with nervous hope. The moment of revelation didn't go as I'd imagined. When I explained that I owned the building, that I was their landlord, Charlotte's face went white, then red, then a mottled purple I'd never seen on human skin before. William laughed, a harsh barking sound that held no humor, and accused me of elaborate fraud. Even with the deeds in front of them, even with my property manager confirming everything, they refused to believe it. But worse than their disbelief was what came next. Charlotte turned to Sarah with tears in her eyes, real tears, and asked how long she'd known about my deception. When Sarah admitted we'd kept it private together, her mother wailed as if she'd been physically struck. William pounded his fist on my desk, shouting about betrayal and lies and how they'd welcomed a con artist into their family. They stormed out, but not before Charlotte delivered her parting shot. She'd find out the truth, she promised. She'd expose whatever illegal scheme I was running. She'd protect her daughter from the criminal they'd allowed into their lives. The venom in her voice made my blood run cold. Sarah tried to minimize the damage over the following days. They were just shocked, she said. They needed time to process. They'd come around once they understood. But I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. The way she'd started looking at our bank statements, the questions she'd ask about property purchases and tax filings. The investigation into my business began within a week. William had connections from his insurance days, golf buddies who worked in various city departments. Suddenly, I was facing surprise inspections at all my properties. Code enforcement officers who'd never bothered me before were finding violations in buildings that had passed inspection just months earlier. The fines started small but multiplied quickly. Charlotte took a different approach. She began poisoning the well of our social circle, spreading whispers about my suspicious wealth and secretive nature. She'd corner Sarah's friends at gatherings, expressing maternal concern about her daughter's safety. She'd mention seeing strange people coming and going from my properties, hint at cash transactions and off-the-books deals. Never anything concrete enough to be called slander, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. The stress began to show in our marriage. Sarah started working late more often, claiming project deadlines, but really just avoiding coming home to another tense evening. I'd find her on the phone with her mother, conversations that would abruptly end when I entered the room. The trust we'd built over years was eroding under the constant pressure of her parents' campaign. Then came the night that changed everything forever. It was Super Bowl Sunday, and we'd planned to watch the game at Charlotte and William's apartment. I'd offered to bring food, hoping that sharing a meal might ease some of the tension. I spent all day preparing their favorite dishes, a peace offering in the form of chicken Alfredo and an elaborate charcuterie board. When we arrived, the atmosphere was different. Charlotte didn't make her usual passive-aggressive comments about the food. William actually thanked me for bringing dinner. For the first few hours, it felt almost normal. We cheered for the same team, groaned at the same bad calls, laughed at the same commercials. I allowed myself to hope that maybe we'd turned a corner. I should have known better. While I was in the bathroom, William went through my coat pockets. Sarah told me later that he'd claimed he was looking for antacids, but he'd pulled out my wallet and started photographing everything. My driver's license, credit cards, business cards, even the family photos I carried. Charlotte stood guard, ready to distract me if I returned too soon. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was when I came back to find them huddled around Sarah, showing her something on William's phone. They'd done a background check on me, hired some cut-rate private investigator who'd compiled a report filled with speculation and insinuation. They'd found every property I owned, every business entity I'd created, and spun it all into a web of suspicion. "Look at this," Charlotte kept saying, pointing at perfectly legal LLC structures as if they were evidence of money laundering. "No honest businessman needs this many companies. He's hiding something, Sarah. We're just trying to protect you." Sarah's face was pale, her hands shaking as she scrolled through the report. I could see her faith in me wavering, see her parents' poison finally taking root. When she looked up at me, the question in her eyes broke my heart. "Who are you, really?" she whispered. The next morning, I woke to find an official-looking envelope under our apartment door. Charlotte and William had reported me to Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The complaint was a masterpiece of malicious creativity, alleging that I was in the country illegally, that my businesses were fronts for human trafficking, that I'd fraudulently married their daughter for a green card. Never mind that I'd been a citizen for 15 years. Never mind that they'd seen my documentation multiple times. Never mind that Sarah and I had been together for 2 years before marriage. In their minds, I would always be the other, the outsider, the threat to their pure American family. The ICE agents who showed up at Charlotte and William's apartment 3 days later were not amused. I'd given them copies of all my documentation, explained the situation, showed them the pattern of harassment. They'd seen this before, they told me, false reports motivated by family disputes or racial prejudice. They warned the Harrisons about making false claims and wasting federal resources. You'd think that would have been the end of it. You'd think being confronted by federal agents about their lies would have shocked some sense into them. Instead, it only made them more determined. If the government wouldn't remove me, they'd find another way to protect their daughter from the dangerous immigrant they'd decided I was. The eviction notice I served them the next day was both the hardest and easiest decision I'd ever made. 30 days to vacate, the legal minimum. I could have given them longer, could have tried one more time to salvage some kind of relationship for Sarah's sake, but I was done being patient, done trying to prove my worth to people who would never see me as anything more than an intruder. Sarah begged me to reconsider. They were still her parents, she argued. They were just scared and confused. They'd made a terrible mistake, but surely we could work through it as a family. I looked at the woman I loved more than life itself and saw that she still didn't understand. To her parents, I wasn't family. I would never be family. I was a problem to be solved, a mistake to be corrected, a threat to be eliminated. Charlotte and William moved out in 2 weeks, suddenly very eager to avoid the Mexican they tried to destroy. They found a cramped 2-bedroom across town, the best they could afford on William's pension. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd left a beautiful apartment they could easily afford because they couldn't stand having a Latino landlord, even one who was their son-in-law. For a brief, shining moment, I thought that would be the end of it. They were out of our daily lives, nursing their wounded pride in their overpriced rental. Sarah and I could focus on rebuilding our trust, on starting the family we'd always dreamed of. I was naive enough to believe that physical distance would stop their campaign to destroy me. The first sign that something was wrong came when Sarah started getting texts at odd hours. She'd grab her phone the moment it buzzed, angling the screen away from me as she typed rapid responses. When I asked who was messaging her at 3 in the morning, she'd mumble about work emergencies or friend crises. But I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw clenched as she read whatever was on her screen. Then came the browser history I accidentally discovered when borrowing her laptop. Article after article about financial abuse, controlling husbands, signs you're being manipulated. The search terms made my stomach drop. How to tell if your spouse is hiding assets. What is financial gaslighting? How to protect yourself from a deceptive partner. Charlotte had found a new angle of attack. If she couldn't prove I was illegal or a criminal, she'd convince Sarah I was abusive. The playbook was brilliant in its simplicity. Every private financial decision became evidence of control. Every attempt to build our future became proof of manipulation. The very wealth they'd refused to believe I'd earned legitimately was now being weaponized as a tool of oppression. The prenatal appointment sabotage started after Sarah announced her pregnancy. We'd been trying for months, and the positive test should have been pure joy. Instead, it became another battlefield. Charlotte started scheduling appointments during my important work meetings, always claiming the doctor had no other availability. She'd accompany Sarah to ultrasounds and checkups, filling the waiting room time with stories about women who'd discovered their husband's true nature only after having children. I started arriving late to meetings, rushing from property inspections to catch the tail end of appointments. But Charlotte always positioned herself as the supportive mother, holding Sarah's hand, asking the questions I should have been there to ask. To the medical staff, I looked like the absent husband, too busy with mysterious business to support my pregnant wife. The turning point came when William claimed to have seen me entering a suspicious building downtown. He described it in perfect detail to Sarah, the weathered brick facade, the unmarked entrance, the way I'd looked around nervously before going inside. What he didn't mention was that he'd followed me there, that he'd been stalking me for weeks, documenting my every movement. The building was one of my newer acquisitions, a former warehouse I was converting into affordable housing. I'd been meeting with contractors, reviewing plans, normal landlord activities. But through William's lens, every normal action became sinister. Why hadn't I told Sarah about this property? What was I hiding behind those unmarked doors? Who was I meeting in secret? Sarah confronted me that night, tears streaming down her face as she demanded answers. I tried to explain, but the explanation itself became evidence of guilt. Why did I have properties she didn't know about? Why wasn't she involved in every decision? The questions came faster than I could answer them, each one planted by her parents, each one designed to erode our trust. I offered to show her everything, every property, every bank account, every business entity, but transparency looked like desperation to her poisoned perspective. Charlotte had coached her well. Abusers always claim openness when they're caught, she'd been told. They'll show you what they want you to see while hiding the real crimes. The separate bank account Sarah opened should have been my wake-up call. I discovered it by accident when a statement was delivered to our apartment. $10,000 transferred from our joint savings, squirreled away in an account I couldn't access. When I asked about it, Sarah's rehearsed response chilled me to the bone. "It's just for emergencies," she said. "Every woman should have money her husband can't touch." Charlotte's influence spread like a cancer through every aspect of our lives. She befriended Sarah's book club members, sharing her concerns about her poor daughter trapped with a controlling immigrant. She volunteered at Sarah's office charity events, charming colleagues with stories of being evicted by her own son-in-law. Soon, people I'd never met were giving me suspicious looks at social gatherings. The anonymous email that exposed my property portfolio was obviously from William. He'd done his homework, compiling deeds and tax records into a comprehensive dossier. But he'd sent it from an untraceable address, making it seem like a concerned citizen trying to protect Sarah from a predator hiding assets. The subject line alone was a masterpiece of manipulation. What Sarah doesn't know about her husband's hidden empire. Sarah printed every page, laying them out on our dining table like evidence in a criminal trial. I came home to find her surrounded by papers, calculator in hand, tears dripping onto property valuations. She'd been adding up the numbers, calculating what I was worth versus what I'd told her. Never mind that I'd offered to share this information freely. The fact that she'd learned it from an anonymous source made it feel like betrayal. I tried to explain why I'd kept my full portfolio private initially. The failed relationships where women had seen only dollar signs. The family members who'd appeared from nowhere with their hands out. The desire to be loved for myself, not my net worth. But every explanation sounded hollow when filtered through her parents' narrative. I wasn't protecting our relationship. I was controlling information, maintaining power, keeping secrets. Sarah left that night for her friend Catherine's house. I woke alone for the first time since our wedding, the empty space beside me feeling like a physical wound. Her grandmother's ring, the one she'd worn every day since I proposed, sat abandoned on her nightstand. The ultrasound photo I kept on my dresser had vanished. Another piece of our life together erased. Charlotte and William's campaign intensified with Sarah out of the house. They orchestrated accidental meetings with mutual friends, always steering conversations toward their concern for Sarah. They attended divorce support groups, not because they were divorcing, but to gather ammunition. Every story of hidden assets and financial abuse was carefully noted, then fed to Sarah as cautionary tales. The therapist they recommended specialized in helping women escape abusive relationships. Dr. Patricia Morse had written extensively about financial control as a form of domestic violence. Her first question to Sarah, reported back to me by a mutual friend who worked in the same building, was, "How long has your husband been hiding assets from you?" Not if, but how long? The conclusion was predetermined. The therapy was just building a case. I started documenting everything, knowing a legal battle was coming. Security cameras at my properties, backed up to multiple cloud services, recorded conversations where legally allowed, paper trails for every financial decision. But documentation felt futile when the narrative was already set. I was the secretive immigrant who'd trapped an innocent American girl. Facts were just inconvenient details to be explained away. The property board complaint arrived on official letterhead, detailing violations Charlotte and William had fabricated from their time as tenants. Deferred maintenance that never happened, security deposits they claimed were stolen, health hazards they'd never reported while living there. Each lie was small enough to be plausible, numerous enough to suggest a pattern of negligence. The local news picked up the story after William's carefully orchestrated interview. Elderly couple speaks out against landlord's son-in-law. They'd aged themselves for the cameras, Charlotte forgetting to dye her roots, William leaning on a cane I'd never seen before. They looked frail and victimized. The perfect poster couple for elder abuse. The reporter never asked for my side of the story. Comments flooded the station's social media within hours. People questioned how a Mexican had acquired so many properties. Demands for investigations into my citizenship, my taxes, my entire existence. Death threats mixed with deportation demands. Charlotte and William had unleashed something they couldn't control, and they reveled in it. Sarah's coworkers started treating her like a battered woman. They'd speak in hushed tones when she entered rooms, offer tissues preemptively, slip domestic violence hotline numbers into her purse. Human Resources scheduled mandatory check-ins, concerned about her home situation affecting work performance. The narrative had taken on a life of its own, beyond even Charlotte's manipulation. The recording device hidden in our couch cushions was the final straw. I'd been looking for my keys when I found it, a small digital recorder still blinking red. Playing it back revealed hours of our private conversations, including intimate moments no parent should hear. The timestamp showed every recording had been automatically uploaded to a cloud account I couldn't access. When I confronted Sarah, she didn't deny it. Her mother had suggested it, she said, for her protection. Document everything in case things escalated. The fact that she saw our marriage as something requiring evidence collection broke what was left of my heart. We weren't partners anymore. We were adversaries building cases against each other. The postnuptial agreement her parents' lawyer drafted was designed to destroy me, acknowledge all hidden assets, accept full financial responsibility for the marriage's failure, agree to terms that would leave me with nothing but debt. The document was less about protecting Sarah and more about punishing me for the crime of loving their daughter while being brown. My refusal to sign sent Sarah into a spiral of tears and recriminations. Her parents had convinced her that my resistance proved their worst fears. An honest man would sign immediately, they said. Only someone with something to hide would hesitate. The logic was circular and unbreakable. Compliance proved guilt. Resistance proved guilt. I couldn't win. Charlotte organized a family intervention disguised as a baby shower planning meeting. Sarah's cousins, aunts, and family friends gathered to share stories of women who'd escaped dangerous marriages. Each tale grew more horrific, featuring hidden debts, secret families, abandoned women left with nothing. The stories weren't subtle. Every villain was a man who'd seemed perfect until revealing his true nature. Sarah came home from that meeting pale and shaking. She looked at me like I was a stranger, a potential threat she'd foolishly allowed into her life. When I reached out to comfort her, she flinched. That involuntary recoil, the fear in her eyes of the man who'd never raised a hand to her, showed how completely her parents had poisoned our love. The GPS tracker on my car appeared during a routine oil change. The mechanic, a young Latino man who recognized me from community events, pulled me aside to show me the magnetic device. He'd seen this before in domestic disputes, he said quietly. His own sister had used one while escaping an abusive relationship. The pity in his eyes as he removed it made me want to scream. I confronted Sarah about the tracker, and her response chilled me. "It's for your safety, too," she said, parroting words that weren't her own. "What if something happened to you at one of your properties? How would I find you?" The logic was absurd, but she delivered it with complete sincerity. In her mind, shaped by months of manipulation, surveilling me was an act of love. William's visit to my properties increased in frequency and boldness. He'd approach tenants in the parking lots, warning them about their landlord's legal troubles. He'd take photos of normal maintenance activities, later spinning them as evidence of suspicious behavior. Several long-term tenants gave notice, explicitly citing concerns about ownership stability. My reputation, built over 15 years, crumbled under his sustained assault. The night Sarah changed the locks was when I finally understood I'd lost her completely. I came home from a property inspection to find my key wouldn't turn. Through the window, I could see Charlotte directing a locksmith while William stood guard. Sarah sat at our dining table, surrounded by legal documents, refusing to meet my eyes through the glass. The temporary protective order she'd filed cited financial abuse and controlling behavior. The allegations were a greatest hits collection of Charlotte and William's lies, hidden assets, isolation from family, threats of deportation against her parents. Each claim was carefully worded to paint me as dangerous without crossing into obvious falsehood. Her parents' lawyer had crafted a masterpiece of legal character assassination. 2 police officers served the order, their faces professionally neutral as they explained I needed to leave immediately. Behind them, I could see Charlotte's satisfied smile, William's triumphant posture. They'd won, they'd taken my home, my wife, my unborn child. All because I dared to love their daughter while being born in the wrong country. I spent that night in a hotel room, staring at the ceiling and wondering how it had come to this. Every decision I'd made had been from love, keeping my wealth private to ensure genuine connection, offering them cheap rent to build family bonds, forgiving their racism in hopes of eventual acceptance. But love wasn't enough when faced with hatred this deep, this calculated, this relentless. Charlotte and William moved into our guest room the next day, claiming Sarah needed support during this difficult time. Their presence in our home, documented extensively on social media, established them as the stable family unit while I was cast as the dangerous outsider. Photos of family dinners where my chair sat empty. Posts about protecting their daughter and future grandchild. A narrative of heroic grandparents saving their family from a predator. The custody battle began before our child was even born. Sarah's lawyer filed for emergency custody, citing unstable environment and financial deception. Charlotte and William provided affidavits detailing witnessed emotional abuse, their imaginations creating incidents that never happened. They painted our home as psychologically harmful, with my hidden assets creating an atmosphere of distrust and manipulation. The judge, reviewing the extensive documentation, had no reason to doubt their story. Respected retirees with deep community roots versus a secretive immigrant landlord who'd hidden assets from his pregnant wife. The narrative wrote itself. Supervised visitation only, with meetings to occur at a court-approved facility. My child would know me only through glass partitions and watchful observers. Charlotte's social media campaign intensified as Sarah's due date approached. prayer requests for their daughter's difficult situation, fundraisers for the struggling single mother, each post carefully crafted to maintain plausible deniability while destroying my reputation. She never named me directly, but anyone who knew our family could connect the dots. The dangerous ex, the absent father, the man they'd tried so hard to welcome before discovering his true nature. My own family in Honduras became targets of their harassment. Calls at odd hours from blocked numbers asking about my past, my immigration history, my business dealings. My mother, who spoke limited English, was reduced to tears by accusations she couldn't fully understand. They were trying to find something, anything, that could retroactively justify their campaign against me. The birth of our daughter happened while I sat in a hospital security office, waiting for verification that I was allowed to be present. Charlotte had warned security about the volatile ex-husband who might disrupt delivery. I nearly missed Emma's first breath because her grandparents had poisoned even this sacred moment with their lies. Only Sarah's weak insistence from the delivery bed got me into the room. They gave Emma Sarah's maiden name as her middle name and insisted on hyphenating her last name. Rodriguez Harrison, with plans to drop the Rodriguez as soon as legally possible. The first photos Charlotte posted on social media cropped me out entirely, showing Sarah surrounded by her loving parents. The narrative of a single mother supported by devoted grandparents was established before Emma was even a day old. I held my daughter for exactly 30 minutes before Charlotte insisted Sarah needed rest. The nurses, briefed on the family situation, watched me like a potential threat. Every movement was scrutinized, every interaction monitored. I kissed Emma's forehead, whispered promises in Spanish that I'd fight for her, and handed her back to a mother who couldn't meet my eyes. The supervised visitation that followed was a special kind of torture. 2 hours every other week in a sterile room that smelled of industrial disinfectant and broken families. A bored social worker documenting every interaction while Charlotte and William waited in the parking lot, timing my visits to the second. Emma would cry when they took her back, reaching for me with tiny hands that didn't understand why Daddy couldn't come home. Charlotte coached Emma from the earliest age to call William Papa. Every milestone was documented on social media with William in my place. First smile for Papa, first laugh with Papa, first steps to Papa. The erasure of my fatherhood was systematic and public, each post liked and shared by their expanding network of sympathizers. The financial investigation ordered by the court dragged on for months. Every property purchase was scrutinized, every tax return examined, every business decision questioned. Charlotte and William had given their lawyer a roadmap of where to look, what to question. The investigation found nothing illegal because there was nothing to find, but the process itself was punishment. Legal fees drained the savings I'd accumulated for Emma's future. Local media continued to cover the story whenever Charlotte fed them updates. The narrative evolved from elderly couple evicted by son-in-law to grandparents fighting for custody from unstable father. They'd learned to play the media perfectly, always available for quotes, always photographing well as concerned elders. I was the absent party who declined to comment, my silence interpreted as guilt. The Latino Business Association, where I'd served on the board for 5 years, asked me to step down temporarily while the legal matters were resolved. They were apologetic but firm. The association couldn't afford the negative publicity. Charlotte had won another victory, severing another connection to my community. The isolation was nearly complete. Sarah filed for divorce on Emma's first birthday. The process server found me at my mother's house, where my family had gathered to celebrate. He handed me the papers in front of my young nieces and nephews who didn't understand why Tio Miguel was crying. Charlotte had orchestrated the timing for maximum humiliation, ensuring my family witnessed my failure. The divorce settlement negotiations were a formality. Sarah's lawyer, paid for by her parents, demanded everything. The house, majority of assets, full custody with limited visitation. My own lawyer advised accepting their terms. Fighting would mean years of litigation, during which Emma would grow up knowing me only through supervised visits. At least with a settlement, there was hope of eventually rebuilding. I signed papers, giving away 70% of everything I'd built, keeping just enough to maintain my remaining properties and pay child support. Charlotte and William celebrated on social media, posting photos from an expensive restaurant with captions about justice finally being served. They'd broken me financially, emotionally, and spiritually, and they wanted the world to know it. The final custody arrangement granted me alternate weekends, still supervised, with the possibility of unsupervised visits after a year of compliance. Charlotte and William received equal time, unsupervised, recognized by the court as stable, positive influences in Emma's life. The injustice burned like acid in my throat, but I smiled and thanked the judge. Any reaction would be used against me. I stood outside the building where it all began, watching through the window as Charlotte and William played with Emma in what had been their apartment. The same space where they'd plotted my destruction now hosted their victory. Emma laughed at something William did, calling him Papa with the innocent trust of a child who didn't know better. I turned away before they could see me, another ghost haunting the edges of the life that should have been mine. But I didn't give up. Couldn't give up. Emma deserved to know her real father, to understand her heritage, to learn that love could overcome hatred. I attended every supervised visit, arriving early and staying until the last possible second. I spoke to her in Spanish when the supervisors weren't listening, teaching her words Charlotte couldn't erase. I brought photos of her grandparents in Honduras, telling stories of the family she had beyond the suffocating embrace of the Harrisons. Slowly, painfully, I began rebuilding. New tenants filled my properties, drawn by fair rent and responsive management. The Latino Business Association quietly welcomed me back after Charlotte's media attention moved on to other targets. My reputation recovered in increments, built on the same foundation of hard work and integrity that had carried me from childhood poverty to success. Sarah began to see cracks in her parents' narrative as Emma grew older. The child who supposedly feared her father would light up when she saw me, running to the glass partition with arms outstretched. The dangerous man Charlotte described bore no resemblance to the patient father who read stories and played games during every precious supervised moment. Doubt crept in where certainty had lived. The breaking point came when Emma asked Sarah why she couldn't live with Daddy like her friends did with their fathers. The question, innocent and heartbreaking, shattered the careful construction Charlotte had built. Sarah saw our daughter's confusion, the damage being done by keeping her from a father who loved her completely. For the first time in years, she questioned whether her parents' protection had become persecution. I'll never forget the day Sarah called me directly, her voice trembling with an emotion I couldn't identify. She wanted to talk, she said. Without lawyers, without her parents, just us. We met at that same coffee shop where I'd shown her the property deeds years before. She looked older, worn down by the weight of decisions made in fear and anger. The conversation that followed was the hardest and most important of my life. Sarah admitted she'd started seeing a new therapist, one she'd chosen herself rather than accepting her parents' recommendation. This therapist had helped her recognize patterns of manipulation, not from me, but from Charlotte and William. The recording devices, the GPS tracker, the constant surveillance. These weren't protections. They were tools of control, used by parents who couldn't accept their daughter's choice of husband. I wish I could say forgiveness came easily. That love conquered all in a moment of dramatic reconciliation. The truth was messier, harder, more human. Trust, once shattered, had to be rebuilt piece by piece. Sarah had to confront the reality that her parents had weaponized her love for them, using it to destroy her marriage. I had to accept that she'd been as much a victim as I had, manipulated by people she'd trusted completely. We started with small steps. Coffee meetings became lunch conversations. Supervised visits included Sarah, creating space for us to parent together. Emma blossomed with both parents present, her laughter healing wounds we'd thought permanent. Charlotte and William, sensing the shift, escalated their efforts, but their influence was waning. Sarah had seen behind the curtain, recognized the wizards for the petty, prejudiced people they were. The day Sarah stood up to her parents was the day I knew we had a chance. They'd come to her apartment, demanding to know why she was spending time with that man. Charlotte cried about betrayal. William raged about Stockholm Syndrome. But Sarah held firm. He's Emma's father, she said simply. And he's the man I loved enough to marry. Your hatred doesn't change that. They threatened to cut her off, to withdraw their support, to fight for custody themselves. Sarah called their bluff. Go ahead, she said. Explain to a judge why you systematically destroyed your daughter's marriage. Show them the recording devices, the GPS trackers, the anonymous letters. Tell them about calling ICE on a U.S. citizen. See how that plays out. They left, diminished and furious, their power finally broken. The path back to each other wasn't smooth or quick. We attended couples counseling, working through the trauma of what had happened. I had to forgive Sarah for not trusting me, for allowing her parents to poison what we'd built. She had to forgive herself for the same things while learning to see me again as the man she'd fallen in love with, not the monster her parents had created. Emma was 4 when Sarah and I remarried in a small ceremony with just our closest friends and my family present. Charlotte and William weren't invited. They'd moved to Florida by then, telling their new neighbors stories about the daughter who'd chosen her immigrant husband over her own parents. The narrative had shifted again, painting them as victims of an ungrateful child rather than architects of destruction. We bought a new house, neutral territory free from poison memories. I showed Sarah everything this time, every property, every account, every business decision. Not because she demanded it, but because transparency had become our foundation. We learned the hard way that secrets, even well-intentioned ones, created spaces for others to plant their poison. Emma grew up bilingual and bicultural, proud of her Honduran heritage despite Charlotte's early attempts to erase it. She called me Papa and knew William only as a distant grandfather who sent birthday cards with checks that grew smaller each year. The victory they'd thought they'd won turned to ash as their daughter and granddaughter built a life that didn't center them. Sarah reconnected with her brother, who admitted he'd always known their parents were wrong, but hadn't felt strong enough to stand against them. He became Uncle Tom to Emma, a bridge to Sarah's family that didn't require going through Charlotte and William. Family, we learned, could be chosen and built rather than simply accepted. The properties Charlotte and William had tried to destroy became the foundation of Emma's college fund and our retirement plans. Every building they'd reported, every tenant they'd driven away, was replaced and improved. Success, I learned, was the best revenge. Not because they knew about it, but because it proved their fundamental belief wrong. I wasn't a threat to their daughter. I was her partner, her equal, her love. Years later, I received a letter from William. Age and illness had humbled him, he wrote. He regretted the pain they'd caused, the years they'd missed with their granddaughter. He stopped short of apologizing, but asked if perhaps we could find a way forward. I showed the letter to Sarah, who read it once and dropped it in the trash. Too little, she said. Too late. Charlotte passed away without reconciliation, taking her hatred to the grave. William lived another 3 years in a nursing home, paid for by the state because he'd spent their savings on lawyers and private investigators. Sarah visited him once, bringing a photo of Emma at her high school graduation. He cried, she reported, seeing what he'd missed. She didn't go back. The story should end there, with poetic justice and lessons learned. But life is rarely so neat. The scars remain, surfacing at unexpected moments. Sarah still flinches when someone asks about her parents. I still document everything. A habit born of necessity that became compulsion. Emma knows she has grandparents she's never met and understands only that they made choices that hurt our family. But we survived. More than survived, we thrived. Love, real love, proved stronger than hatred. Truth outlasted lies. The family we built together, multicultural and multilingual, chosen and cherished, stands as proof that prejudice doesn't have to win. Charlotte and William spent their final years in bitter isolation while we filled our home with laughter, languages, and love. Sometimes I drive past that first apartment building, remembering the hopeful man who offered his future in-laws a discounted rent, believing kindness could overcome prejudice. I wasn't wrong exactly. Kindness did win, eventually. It just took longer and cost more than I'd ever imagined. But Emma, brilliant and bilingual, proud of both her heritages, is worth every battle we fought. The Harrisons thought they were protecting their daughter from a dangerous immigrant. Instead, they nearly destroyed her chance at happiness with a man who loved her completely. They saw my brown skin and heard my accent and assumed they knew my worth. They were wrong. I knew my worth all along. It just took Sarah a little longer to remember it too. And in the end, that's all that mattered. Not Charlotte's campaigns or William's investigations. Not the lawyers or the court battles or the supervised visits. What mattered was two people who loved each other finding their way back through the wreckage of other people's hatred. What mattered was Emma having both her parents. What mattered was building a family strong enough to withstand anything, even the people who should have been its biggest supporters. Love won. It took years and tears and more pain than any family should endure, but love won. And somewhere, if there's any justice in the universe, Charlotte knows that her hatred accomplished nothing but her own isolation. She died believing she was right, but being right in your own mind means nothing when you're wrong in your heart. Emma carries my last name with pride. Sarah wears her wedding ring again, and I own 12 buildings in the city where they tried to destroy me, each one a testament to the American dream they thought I didn't deserve. That's my story. That's our story. It's not the one Charlotte and William would tell, but they gave up their right to narrate our lives when they chose hatred over love. Every family has its struggles, but not every family survives them. We did. Battered and scarred, wiser and warier, but together. And in the end, together is all that matters.